Greetings, this is Millicent Pitts with Ocean Exchange. Thank you for joining us today for another in our series with the Marine Technology Society about the blue economy. Today we're going to talk about tourism and recreation, and as an added bonus, talk about some citizen science that connects with this. Ocean Exchange is a nonprofit. We're gladly celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. We are privately funded. You see a selection of some of those sponsors on that first slide. We award $235,000 cash purse over 4 awards in 2021. This will culminate with our event in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, October 24th through 26th. So I welcome a conversation with any of you in the audience about that. Our call for solutions competing for these 4 awards is currently open. There are deadlines both in August and September. I encourage you to go to oceanexchange.org to see the details of that. Now I'll turn it over to my partner.
Great, thank you, Millie. And once again, it's great to be with you and Dane for another one of our sessions. So briefly, MTS is a professional society that has about 2,000 individual, corporate, and institutional members in 20 countries. Established in 1963 on the premise that it's important to foster advances in marine science and technology that benefits humankind and contributions to the sustainability of the planet. And I like to say that we connect, communicate, and are a catalyst. We connect to our members through our professional committees and sections, which are our sections are geographic. We have a student section, and now we're very proud of our early career ocean professionals or ECOP section. We are excited that our events also are returning to having an in-person component. So I ask all of you to join us at the Offshore Technology Conference in Houston in the middle of August, Oceans in Action, 30 August to 2 September in Mississippi, and Oceans 2021 San Diego, Porto, 21 to 23 September. Both our conferences also have a hybrid component, and I think that's really important as we try to broaden reach to new audiences who may not have the financial ability to travel to these conferences. And similarly, the webinars allow us to stay connected and make new introductions. As a catalyst, I want to mention that MTS, along with the Society for Underwater Technology, just launched a Chartered Marine Technologist Certification Program. So if you're a technologist out there and are interested in this, please go to our website to find out how you can apply. And certainly, communications is so vital in what we do in the understanding of technology, the sciences, and how we need to sustain our planet. So we do that through a variety of methods. We have our monthly newsletter called Currents, and we also have our social media. I will let the audience know that our journal in June focused on the ocean decade and the ocean shots that the U.S. National Committee called for. This particular journal is open and available to everybody. So again, please visit our website to enjoy that journal. So Dan, I'm going to throw it over to you to moderate another fabulous lineup, because who doesn't like a day on the ocean and in the ocean or at the beach? I know for one, that's my favorite place. So Dane, over to you.
Thanks, Zenka. Hi, everybody. I'm very excited today about who we've got on. We've got some really great speakers who are doing some really great work understanding how to teach and how to learn about the environment. I've been reading books by Tristan Gooley, who is a British naturalist, and if you're not familiar with his work, it's really interesting. He's studied deeply how indigenous people read their environment, how animals sense and read their environment. The intelligence of animals is incredible. We're pretty good at it, and I don't want to take away from us right now. We're really good at reading our environment. If you get a text from somebody who's pretending to be happy with emojis and stuff, but you can instantly tell if they're off. If I'm driving down a country road near here and I see a line of cars coming to me, I can instantly tell that the person in the third car is doing something weird like texting because they've drifted into the center line just a little bit. I can even see the smudge of the angle of their face a quarter of a mile away. We're really good at that. I don't have to think about doing that. But put me out in the woods or out in the ocean, and I'm just not read into that. I'm not skilled at that. It's a skill we've lost, but it is a skill we can regain. And what we can sense as humans and what animals can sense is pretty amazing. I really recommend these Tristan Gooley books because it will really open up your ability to understand your own environment. And he talks about things like an elephant can sense thunder 100 miles away just through the vibrations coming through its feet. Robins can detect weather patterns and know that a storm is coming through. They can get ahead of the storm, flying hundreds of miles to get where the earthworms are coming out of the earth to avoid being drowned, and they're picking them out. It's kind of amazing what we can do. When we travel and learn to read the signs of other environments, it changes us. We learn a new way of looking at the world we live in. A couple of weeks ago, I was down in Florida in the Keys, flats fishing, and working with a fishing guide. He was teaching us how to read the surface of the water and see what was happening. And as soon as we learned to see what he was seeing, we were able to catch all of our dinner in about 10 minutes. It was kind of amazing to do. When I came back, I had this experience. I was around the house and I noticed a doe, which is around our house a lot. I can tell it's her because of some of her behaviors, which are different from the other does. But on this particular afternoon, something was really different, and I was able to sense it. The way she was drinking, places she was drinking from, places she was lying in the shade where she'd never been before. And sure enough, about 20 minutes later, I looked out and saw her on the edge of the meadow, licking off a tiny little fawn. And this fawn was standing there, and then suddenly from around behind her came a second fawn. I had sensed that she was going to fawn that afternoon just from her behavior, just because I'd been studying it. I'd been spending a lot of time out in nature. So today, we've got two speakers who are using tourism as a way to help us expand our sensitivity and our ability to sense the environment around it. Because when we learn to read our environment, it changes us. And as I was doing my research for this on Danica's website, I saw an ad for a Netflix documentary called Chasing Coral. And the subtitle of the movie really caught me. What lies below reveals what lies ahead. And that can reveal to going down and looking at coral reefs. But it also, more importantly, when we go deeper into understanding our environment and our lives and sensing what happens around us, it will reveal for us what lies ahead. So I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker. First, we're going to have Chris Maxey from the Eleuthera Foundation talking to us, and then Danica Reinecke from SmartFin talking about how she's using surfing to gain information and data on ocean environments. So Chris, over to you. Tell us about Eleuthera and what you're doing down there with the school.
Thanks, Dane. I want to take a moment to thank Millie for making the connection and giving Island School an opportunity to share. It's interesting. The word tourism is a tough word for us because we are a research and education focused organization, community, and yet it has a lot of power because in reality, most of our kids in our leadership program come from around the world, mostly from the US. Last night, I had an incredible opportunity to say a few words at the end of our graduation. Our first summer term came to an end. And here we had kids, again, from mostly across the country that have been fully immersed in this environment and working to solve this question of how do you live well in a place. So our not-profit vision has always been how to get young people involved in doing authentic work. Like they learn to scuba dive like a tourist would, but then they take that skill and they're out planting coral nurseries, and literally studying and enhancing this challenging situation with coral depletion in our environment here. Next slide, please. So I want to kind of zoom you in to where we are. I mean, astronauts have said this view of the planet is the most beautiful view. And it's because the water is so clear and you have the contrast from that deep tongue of the ocean in the middle of that image. And we're that long, thin island, I think you can make out, Eleuthera, on the outer boundary of the banks. Next slide, please. So you zoom in and we're on the southwestern tip of Eleuthera, and that dark water is deep water. So literally, we have every habitat you can imagine, from mangrove creeks right out into the deep ocean. I've done work with Aleutian and Ocean Explorer and Dalio and other big name organizations, and getting young people out in submarines, finding new species, doing this kind of work. It's unbelievable. When I say young, just to define, I mean, we're primarily a high school program, and yet we're educating, you know, pre-K through PhD at the end of the day. Next slide, please. So this is the first day, right? I mean, how do we get teenagers away from their screens and literally putting their faces in the sand and asking questions like, how did these islands form? How are we going to get to know this place in a way that helps us get to know any place we live and helps us make a difference? You know, last night in my talk with these kids, I said, I am so hopeful based on the energy that I feel in this room, because we're going to launch you guys back into the big world, and I know you're going to do great things. Next slide. So, you know, we've tried and failed and succeeded in a bunch of ventures. Our early days were working with University of Miami and their lab and trying to grow cobia in open ocean cages. So we have done some pretty high-tech work, and it's always involved students, right? Everything we've done has involved not only high school students, but our local programs, our Deep Creek Middle School, where again, young people are engaged in doing something that goes far beyond a test or a textbook. Next slide. We really got on the map with sharks. We don't have a lot of, you know, the sexy marine mammals, but we do have incredible populations of sharks. And here's a team putting a satellite tag on a tiger shark, on a juvenile tiger shark. And, you know, again, students, I'm talking about high school, can you imagine being 16 and have your name on a research paper that is presented in peer review situations? Next slide, please. So one of the questions in how to live well is how are we going to grow food? And unlike most of the Caribbean that's volcanic, we're a limestone nutrient depleted place. And so students have been designing and developing and enhancing an aquaponics system, which is bringing a full plate of food to our table. So lettuce and tilapia and fish and really good food. Next slide, please. Energy, another big topic. We rely on the wind and the sun to supply most of our energy. We got to catch up on that. We were the first. If you look at this next slide, the Prime Minister is literally pulling the switch on the first intertie in the country's history, and that was 16 years ago. So we're front runners in modeling technology that makes sense for a place like the Bahamas, right? They're still burning diesel fuel to power their country and power these little islands that really are screaming for solar solutions now, and we're at the front edge of that opportunity. Next slide. So, you know, I've talked about some systems, and I could talk on and on about waste and energy and food, and yet the most important thing we do is we connect cultures, and we connect our older kids to the passion that comes from serving others and learning from others. And so from the very beginning, we had an outreach program that led us to create a local school that's now had kids receive scholarships that are more than what we've invested in the school. So these next few slides just show one of the critical elements to our educational tourism model is to truly immerse our clients, so to speak, our students, in not only the local habitat, but also the culture. Next slide. And the next one. You can see from these pictures that these relationships are real. I have kids come back 10 years from when they graduated, and they find their local buddy, and these kinds of connections again have launched some of these local kids who come from a really, I mean, Eleuthera is a outer island, and south of Eleuthera is relatively poor, and we're really proud of the fact that we've been able to launch these kids into boarding schools and colleges and opportunities they normally wouldn't have. Last slide. So please take a look at our website. You know, I tried to keep it lean and mean. There's a lot of information, a lot of videos, a lot of opportunities to learn, and we offer scholarships. So spread the word, and I'll turn it back to you, Dane. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And stay with us because we're going to have some questions for you, and hope you'll have some questions for Danica. And it's really exciting. I do urge everybody to go to the website. I've got a couple of granddaughters who are in high school, and so I really want to get them over there in the next couple of years and have them have that experience. Now let's turn to Danica. Danica, tell us about what you're doing with SmartFin and what you're trying to learn there.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I'm really excited to share more about the work we've been doing at SmartFin and how it ties into this idea of tourism, the blue economy. We go to next slide. Thank you. So we're SmartFin. SmartFin is a nonprofit citizen science project that's developed a piece of sensor technology that fills a gap in ocean data near the coasts. Let's go to the next slide. So these statistics kind of frame the issue and why coastal ecosystems in particular are under threat from climate change, and also have really significant impact on people who live in coastal communities, which is an area of significant population density. Nearly 80% of people on Earth live within 60 miles of a coast, and then depend on the ocean for their physical safety through things like coastal erosion and flooding, food security, economic activities. And we really see the impacts of climate change on the ocean most significantly at the place where humans interface with it, which is at the coast. Next slide. So these three images kind of walk through the idea that led us to developing particularly a surfboard fin that measures ocean chemistry. So the first image in the upper left-hand corner, those 4 blue circles represent along the Florida Keys, the places where there are stationary moored buoys that are measuring wind temperature and ocean temperature and other chemical parameters in that area. The image below that with just the red dots highlight the areas that are most at risk. So these, the Florida Keys, as Chris mentioned, or Southern Florida in general, have really unique ecosystems. They're the only place in the US that combine coral and mangroves and seagrass beds, all of which help mitigate the impacts of climate change on the ocean and offer other solutions. So the areas that are at risk are the red dots along the coast there. And then this third larger image with the yellow dots superimposed are the areas that are most highly trafficked for recreational board sports. So it's surfing, stand-up paddleboarding. And you can see that those more densely cover the areas that we need to better understand in order to protect than just the stationary buoys that are measuring one fixed point, often sample only about once an hour, and leaves huge swaths of the ocean unmeasured. The other technology that's used for measuring temperature in the ocean are satellites, but those also, we just don't know how accurate they are once you get closer to land, and so they require really good ground truthing in place measurements, which are also insufficiently provided by these buoys. Next slide. So what we came up with is this surf and paddleboard fin. You see some of the iterations of the design that we've gone through here. It started with a shortboard fin, a few iterations of that use Bluetooth technology. And what we've eventually come to is the larger image, which is a longboard fin. It has an automatic wet dry sensor. It automatically transmits data after the session and really integrates seamlessly with the user's experience. Next slide. So to go a little bit deeper about how the technology works, the surfer or paddleboarder basically just has to dip it in the water to turn it on. While they are surfing and paddleboarding, it's collecting wave data and temperature data. When they get out, those data are automatically transmitted to a cloud database, which then provides some visualizations to both a web application and a mobile application. Web application is where scientists or researchers or other stakeholders are accessing those data that are collected. And the mobile application provides some more features for the participant. And there's going to be some community building, building that connection between the research that's done with the data collected and the folks who have collected it. So lots of ideas that we'd like to add on for that user app as we get further into this. Next slide. So we were able to pilot this program in San Diego with a Surfrider Foundation chapter that's there. This was with a previous iteration of the technology, but we were able to got some really good feedback about how to improve the technology, had really, really great participation from the surfers who participated, and really proved out that they are great ambassadors for the ocean, and that adding this element to your surfing session really helps to connect you with the environment in significant ways that we're hoping to measure the impact of that attitude change on other aspects of people's lives and how they're interacting with the environment. On the right, the two images show how we were able to validate that we are collecting really accurate data and that we are in fact providing more dense coverage than just the moored buoys. So the top graph, in blue, we see measurements from a moored buoy off the end of Scripps Pier. And in black, we see how the measurements from SmartFin relate to those. And then the lower image, again, shows the moored buoys, and the white dots show places that we were able to collect data with SmartFin. So much denser, and really proved out that this can work on a small scale. Next slide. So while this is an innovative piece of sensor technology that really does fill a gap of critically needed climate data, a big component of what we're doing is building community at the beach with folks who live near the beach, with folks who visit and rent a stand-up paddleboard or a surfboard to take a lesson. In this image here, the man in the white long sleeve t-shirt and shorts is Dr. Phil Bresnahan, who we partnered with while he was doing his PhD at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. So he's a really great oceanographer and researcher. And here you just see him interacting with community members, being sort of an evangelist for SmartFin, passing on both the inspiration to collect these data in the ocean and why they're important. And we believe that as more people learn about this, we can take much better collective action to protect the ocean against climate change and to recognize it as a significant part of climate strategy. Next slide. So this is the beginning for us, but we really like to think about SmartFin as a scalable sensor platform, and that its citizen science deployment strategy is also an innovation that means that we can yield greater results. So we've started with the SmartFin, as you saw today. In future iterations, there are two tracks that we'd like to develop. So surfing and stand-up paddleboarding are great, but we'd also like to refactor that technology to work with snorkeling or kayaking or sailboats, or maybe it's a wearable. I think that there are a lot of areas that we could go that expand the ways that you can use this. And then also, we'd like to add sensors for other parameters. So we know that temperature is really important, but we also know that things like dissolved oxygen, pH, chlorophyll, give researchers really, really useful information to understand the dynamics of coastal ecosystems. So expanding along those two tracks means that we're able to gather a bigger data set, and from that, able to better draw insights about what's happening there. And as we're doing all of this and adding more participants to gather more data, we're able to connect folks in coastal communities or people who visit the ocean closer to the research and the basic research and science that's happening there, and build a just more engaged community overall. Next slide. So that's all I've got today. Thanks so much for listening. I'm excited to take any questions. And the last things on here just really highlight, so everyone in the bottom left is an oceanographer and surfer who's clamoring for these data. We're really excited to get these surfboard fins out into the water to start engaging with communities and educating people about the importance and gathering this data set. Thank you.
Thanks, Danica. So if you have questions, please put them in the question section in the toolbar on the right side of your screen. And would love to have it. But Danica, let me start with a couple of questions. First of all, do you have any data on how big the international surfing travel population is? It must be huge. I know so many people. I grew up surfing. I know so many people who make their vacations around going to Mexico surfing or South America or the islands. Do you have any data on that? Because it must be enormous.
Yeah, so we know that there are at least 3.5 million folks globally who would identify themselves as surfers. What we don't know is the much larger number of people who, like myself, who have taken one surf lesson, and so maybe wouldn't identify myself as a surfer, but thought it was really fun, would like to do more of it, and could possibly enter that category at some point.
Well, yeah, and then imagine traveling with that board down to Puerto Escondido in Mexico, or down, to some fun place. I took a trip to Australia surfing a few years ago and up and down the coast. It was great. I could have brought you so much data. So let me ask the second question is, and Chris, if you have questions, join in, but once you're gathering this data, and I understand right now it's a little bit limited in scope, what's your intention to do with the data?
So the data then become useful to researchers, and I have a couple of examples of how it's currently being used or how we envision it'll be used in the future. So there's a researcher in the UK who took a smart fin on an Atlantic transect from the UK to South America, and he studies satellite temperatures in the ocean. So they were comparing satellite surface temperatures with the temperatures measured by SmartFin, and we're able to show a really good agreement between those to corroborate the satellite measurements and also SmartFin as a tool. So that's one use that's already happened. We're working on a project in Southern Florida with a researcher at Nova Southeastern who is particularly interested in coral reefs, and then also does some work in estuaries there. And so those are, again, ecosystems that having these data that can help you better understand the micro environments along a coral reef that can answer questions about, in a reef, why some coral bleach and some don't, are things that we're starting to be able to look at.
That's great. So again, if you have questions for either Danica or Chris, please put them up in the questions section and we'll get to them. Chris, I've got a question for you. In your advanced research, I love the educational part of what you're doing, but in the advanced research, what are you guys focused on there in Eleuthera?
Well, there. We're doing a lot of work with coral now. We're a hub for regenerating some of the species that are somehow making it through these warm temperatures. So our teams, and again, students are always involved, but the experts are leading the charge, are going out when the corals spawn and collecting, the spawned animals and bringing them back and literally growing them in captivity in our wet lab, and then planting. Imagine being, again, a 17-year-old who is going out diving, but not just looking. They're planting a new coral colony on the reef, feeling like they're helping with this climate change challenge. So that's it. That's a big one. Sharks are always big on our list, and studying the Exuma Sound and also the deep ocean, right? It's the final frontier. I mean, Sylvia Earle, who was on our board for our first decade, loves to talk about the age of exploration not being over, right? That most of our planet has never been seen. And so the opportunity to go right off our coast here and again, find new species and learn more about this habitat that will start to be more and more affected by humans is a big part of our world.
Yeah, it's odd that we know more about space than we do about what's happening in our own oceans, which is pretty amazing. Hey, we got a question for you, Max, from your buddy Theodore Thompson, who asks, he says, okay, well, wait a minute, I'm having trouble. We're having trouble with the questions function, so his question is locked up. But he said, nice to see you, Maxie, and he wanted to know about what's going on with some of the research, and it was a specific question. I can't get to it.
Okay.
So if you have questions, let's switch over. Let's put your questions in the chat.
Dane,
I got a question.
the question was new objectives in recycling.
New objectives in recycling from your pal.
For sure. There's two major projects that are ongoing. One is trying to figure out how to turn plastic back into fuel, a process called pyrolysis. And a young engineer and team of students, again, set up a system that on a small scale was not economical, but they were successful, right? They were literally using propane to heat the system to turn the plastic back into acetylene, and we put it in a cement mixer and fired right up. On a larger scale, that's exactly what's needed, and that's a really exciting project. The other one is human waste, right? I mean, we're a community that expands to over 200 people, and way back we designed, and I think Ted knows this already, we designed a system, we call it our poo-poo garden, but rather than just flushing our toilets and having it leach onto the reefs, we created a completely enclosed system and are growing bananas and other like food out of our waste. And it's a constructed wetland. It's the wastewater coming out is not harmful to the environment, relatively benign. And it's just, it's a great story. And then the solid waste, I'm sorry to get into this, but it's really cool, can be turned into natural gas and then a nutrient stream that again helps us grow food. So like waste is a resource, and if you're asking that question, how are you gonna live well in a place, you really have to start marching towards, and it's infinity, right? You're never gonna get there, but how do we go from where we are now to zero waste? And that's both human and all the materials that bring food to us. How do we get more efficient? So those are two big areas for us.
That's great. And we've had some other people on this website over the last few months who've been dealing in exactly those areas. Hey, Danica, I've got a question for you, two questions, in fact. Could you talk about your business and operating model for SmartFin? Help us understand how you're operating.
Yeah, great. So we have spent a lot of time trying to get the technology really right and work through some of the engineering and manufacturing processes. So we're right on the cusp of starting to test a business model, but we have an idea of how we believe this will work going forward. So a couple of things that were important to us are that we want to make sure that programming that we're rolling out is led by a scientific need for data in a particular location or on a specific species. And so we're working primarily initially with oceanographers, learning about the research that they're doing, and then going to the places where they need data from and organizing with different community groups. Like Surfrider has been a really excellent partnership for us because they've got chapters all across the country and even globally, but also looking at places like rental shops or surf schools where there's someone to be an educator about SmartFin, and also places where the boards are going out every day or multiple times a day. And so we're getting a volume of data that's probably more significant than, an individual with a fin on their board who hopefully is able to get out, as much as possible once a week, more than that, but probably less frequently than a rental shop. And so the way that this will work is that we're a nonprofit, so a lot of this will also be hopefully supported by sponsorship or donation, but pairing the scientists' budget with the community group, trying to be able to match the number of fins that are there to accelerate and multiply what we're able to do in our particular area.
Yeah, So I would think that for manufacturers, going to the manufacturers, if I was shopping for a board and one had a smart fin and one didn't, and the cost differential wasn't that high, or the manufacturer could absorb it, obviously I'd buy the one with the smart fin, mostly because I just want to look cool when I'm at the beach. But it would be a great way to get that out for you. So here's the second question for you. What kind of platform would you possibly use for the pH sensor?
Yeah, so the engineering challenge with a lot of these is getting them small enough and thin enough to put into a surfboard fin. So the surfboard fins are, longboard fin is, probably 8 inches long, but it's really thin. And so we believe that it's possible to get that technology into that platform. But if you start to think about a kayak, or if we're integrating into a boogie board rather than into a fin, there are lots of different form factors that would give you more volume to work with, which we think will make it easier to add sensors for different parameters.
That's great. So this is really a question for both of you, and it's a really good question. We're talking about public engagement and citizen science. What kind of bottlenecks have you encountered in trying to engage people with this, and how do you get over the obstacles?
I just think of the solution. I know I'm kind of dodging the question a little bit, and yet when you, like, I love telling the story about middle school kids, local Bahamian kids who just learned to dive. They're in 9th grade, 12, 13 years old. And we literally received some GEF funding for them to create a public service announcement about the value of parrotfish, about why, the fishermen now have fished out the grouper and other species, and they're starting to target the parrotfish here like they've been targeted in other places. And it was so powerful to have, like, the next generation actually be the scientists that are telling their parents, or let's just be honest, right? You get to a certain age, you're set in your ways. So our work is really putting the onus on the young people to help shape the future, and it works.
That's great. And Danica, how about you?
I think for us, in comparison with other citizen science programs, so if we think about citizen science, mostly came out of ornithology. And so folks were able to go out and record observations or maybe do counting of bird species. And those were data that were really critically needed in that research. Where SmartFin differs and creates a bottleneck for itself is the fact that we need a piece of technology that is relatively expensive. It's not super high tech, but it is, a high tech piece of technology in order to enable folks to go out and gather these data. And so, if it was something everyone could do with their smartphone, that bottleneck wouldn't exist. But we do have to get through some of the, the business modeling of the economics of manufacturing them and getting them out. And I think that's the bottleneck that we see most.
Zenka has a question for you, Danica. She says there are 4.1 million small-scale fishers around the world. They're on the water almost every day, and they harvest approximately half the world's seafood. This will dramatically change in the face of climate change. Have you thought about partnering with fishing groups to scale your solution to small-scale fisheries?
So we don't yet have connections in that space, but I think that will be a next really great move for us to make. We began with recreational board sports so that we could engage a population that might not otherwise be thinking about this impact on the ocean and to do this sort of broad public engagement. But I think getting into those specific groups with probably a different piece of technology that integrates with those fishing boats gives us like a boon basically to gather a high volume of data and also to be working with different communities that are interacting with the ocean.
That question was from Sep Hokebo. Sep, pardon me for butchering your name. We're having trouble with the questions. If you're putting questions in the questions, it's hard to read. So if you can put them in the chat, that'll be good. I've got a question for you, Chris. Looking out 10 years, where would you like the Island School to be? How many students? What would it look like?
I'm going to lean back into Sylvia Earle, who has started this effort to create hope spots around the world. I feel like our model has been tested now after more than 2 decades, and wants to be just that. But a hope village, I think the hope spots are all about these remote, diverse, beautiful, natural habitats in the ocean. And what we need to do is find places where people and the habitats are interacting in a responsible way that brings hope for the next generation. So I'm confident that the momentum that we're seeing right now, especially coming out of this crisis, that this kind of hope village idea can bring. I'm on the phone with a guy who wants to do something in Canada, Hawaii, Mexico. There's interest, and what I'm most excited about is I know some of our alums are going to come back and say, hey, I want to create an island school type intentional community where learning is at the core, but how to live well is what the curriculum is all about.
So that leads us to a really great question from Evelyn Tickle. With these kind of communities, Danica, around the world, like the Island School and different groups of scientists with local interests, can they use the SmartFin and then access the data they collect for their own use?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, the database of data is freely accessible to folks that are using SmartFin. So both through the web application, which shows visualizations of all the data that's ever been collected with SmartFin, so you can compare and contrast that, versus the mobile app, which shows you your surf session, the temperatures that you encountered on that, and lets you compare, how many surf sessions you have versus somebody else with a different board. So there's different functionality in each place, but in both, you're able to see all of the data and use it for whatever purposes are suited.
That's great. Here's a question from Chris Massey for you. For Chris from Tundi. So it's a big fan of what you're doing. I'm wondering if you think the pandemic's effect on the cruise ship industry creates an opportunity for a reset with more thoughtful and sustainable plans for infrastructure development.
It's nice to know Tundi's online. So, I don't want to ramble too long, but, if you look at the spectrum of tourism, the most shallow neo-colonial product out there is the cruise ship, right? Let's just be honest. They come, they leave their waste, all the food, everything comes from the cruise ship, all the money goes back to the cruise ship. It's not, it's not just, it's not okay. And Disney is about to build, a $500 million pier into this little island here on one of the most magical beaches in the world, a place called Lighthouse Beach. So Tundi and I have been trying to fight that battle, and we're going to lose because they're a $70 billion company, and their decisions are driven by bottom line. They're not driven by, a triple bottom line awareness of culture and equality and environment. And so, yeah, I mean, I would love to believe that, I tried to celebrate Disney and get them to create some kind of campus and research station and make King Trident come to the beach all fired up and blow the Concord, but that didn't work. So if anybody has any ideas out there about how we can, use the awareness that the world has in the pandemic and the world, especially our U.S. culture has about equality to get companies to invest in a responsible way in tourism.
That's great. Thanks. Well, listen, Chris and Danica, thank you both so much. What fascinating, and really learned a lot. And Millie, back to you. Millie, we're not hearing you.
You're muted, Millie.
I'm back. Thank you both. It's great. And thank you, Dane. It is vacation time and the beach is great, as Zeninka said. If you were hoping that we would also have Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello, they could not be with us today. And if you don't know who they are, then I suggest you Google them. And I see some puzzled looks there. Thanks so much, Dane. You're the greatest. Dane is the MC for our live event. I want to push that again, October 24th through 26th in Fort Lauderdale. We invite delegates to attend. We're looking for solutions to apply to our call for solutions today. Dane does this pro bono for us out of the goodness of his heart, and you can see he loves it. So thank you, Dane. Next
You're
slide.
welcome. Thank you.
We have our next webcast, August 4th, about Ocean Enterprise. We'll blast out all the details of the speakers and other information. The important thing is to put 11 o'clock Eastern on your calendar for August 4th. Save the date, as I said, in Fort Lauderdale. You can find more about Ocean Exchange. I have our coordinates there. Thank you for attending. Next slide. We have behind the scenes people. You see them listed: Alice, Monica, Christina. None of this would happen without them. This has been great. It's a mix of technology, but a lot of the kind of the social elements as well. It's been a good break from some of our other webcasts that are much more about technology and science. And I like what both of you said about the human elements of all of this. We have a webcast library. You can see the coordinates there. Go on our website. The MTS curates these videos as well. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.